Okay, today is October 2nd or October 3rd, actually. This is our Aesop's Fables live meeting. For any students in Aesop's Fables, doesn't matter how old you are or what lesson you're on, I'll try to make it helpful for everybody. We'll talk about Fables number 98 and maybe 99 today. And then at the end of the meeting, if you have any questions about Aesop's Fables or any of your studies, I'll hang out here on the chat and answer as many questions as you have. So just kind of keep calm until the end of our of what I'd like to share. And if any questions come up, just hold on to them until the end, and then I'll answer all of them. So just be patient, okay? Don't fool around in the chat room, because when I'm going through my lesson here, if I see any fooling around in the chat room, I'm just going to remove the person who's fooling around, because I don't have time to deal with that. And it's sort of in the corner of my eye, so I can't keep up with all the chats once I get started. Okay. One last question. Jackson asked about assessment. Will there be a written assessment and a quiz? No. Usually once I make a quiz, I'm going to close the assessment, so it won't be available anymore. Okay. So that's that. All right. Our first fable here. Actually, I have a couple announcements before I get started. I almost forgot. First of all, when you register for these class meetings, you don't need to register every time. Some of you, it looks like you register before every meeting. When you register one time, you get an email with a link to the meeting. Just keep that email, and you can, use the link in that email to come to the class meeting. You don't have to register for every single meeting. Okay. Some of you do that. Just register one time. I just look to make sure that the people who register for the class are actually Academy students and not crazy people. And once you get that email that gives you the link, you're good to go. Just keep that email and use that link for future classes. All right. No need to keep registering. Secondly, at the beginning of this chat, when I first got here, I posted a request and asked if you would, after this meeting sometime, doesn't have to be today even, but whenever you get a chance, we've got some surveys posted on the Academy website. If you go to classicalliberalarts.com/surveys, and I'd really like to ask for all of the students in your family and your parents, whoever's involved in your homeschooling, to complete those surveys. Okay, those are not for me. Those are for the organization that's accrediting the Academy, which is going to be good for you in the future. But we're collecting feedback from students and parents, and it's just helpful to have as much feedback as possible. So it's just a couple questions, like multiple choice questions that you're asked about your studies and things like that. Really simple stuff. But if you can take some time and ask your parents to complete that survey, it'd be very helpful. There's one for elementary school students, one for older students, and one for parents. Okay. So if you can complete those surveys, that would be very helpful. Thirdly, I already talked about quizzes, so that's done. And then the last thing, we've got live class meetings Monday through Thursday. Friday's still open. So if any of you have an idea for a class or a subject you'd like to have a live meeting for each week, let me know, because we still have time available on Friday. I try not to schedule too many meetings, because I know you've already got stuff to do, but I was thinking about meeting on Fridays for writing classes, to talk about English composition and writing, maybe get into logic and rhetoric during that same meeting period. But if that's interesting, I'd be willing to do that, but I'm not going to do it if no one's going to show up. So if there's a course that you think would be good, let me know, and we'll add some more live classes. All right, let me just see here. I see some more comments coming in. World chronology, no. Classical grammar. Let me just say one thing about live meetings. Not every class, not every course works for live meetings, because there are some courses where we have to go carefully lesson by lesson. And so if we start and then we get 10 weeks in, no one can join us because they've got to start at the beginning. So some courses, like math courses, really don't work for live class meetings. So it's got to be a class that works for live meetings. A course like classical grammar, it's really better if I just make videos and post them in the lessons. And I do that as often as I can. I think writing would be good. Logic and rhetoric could be good. Chronology is too easy, I think. Most students don't need help with that. But who knows? If there's interest in studying history together, I'm happy to do that. So just give me some feedback and, based on what you can actually do, right? Because you've got to actually come to these meetings. So I'm willing to have as many meetings as you guys find helpful. Just let me know. All right. And there's no charge for these meetings, so it doesn't matter how many there are. I think these are kind of fun myself. So anyway, let's get started with Aesop's Fables here. We're going to study the fable of the two rabbits. I'll share my screen so we can see it. And I'm going to read this one because it's long, so just bear with me. This is the fable of the two rabbits. Okay, if you've got a piece of paper or a notebook, it'd be a good idea to jot some ideas down as we go along here to help you with the quiz. Remember, there's a quiz for this one waiting for you. So it will help you to get through that quiz easily. If you don't have a notebook or paper with you, it's no big deal because you can always watch the video later. It's being recorded. But anyway, this is the fable of the two rabbits, and this is a longer fable. If you look, it's almost a full page, really is a full page. But this is a good lesson for you. You know, sometimes students, they'll see a longer lesson and they'll say, oh, it's a longer lesson. But just because it's longer doesn't mean it's more difficult. And sometimes shorter lessons are actually the more difficult ones. So don't judge a fable by how long it is, all right? This is the fable of the two rabbits. A rabbit who was about to have a family, So a mother rabbit who was pregnant and about to give birth. And if you don't know about rabbits, do any of you have rabbits real quick before I get started here? Does anybody have any rabbits? Some families keep rabbits just as pets. Anybody have rabbits? How do rabbits give birth? Do they give birth to one baby? Like a woman normally does, or do they give birth to more babies? What do you know about rabbit babies? Multiple babies. Yeah, they give birth to tons of babies, and they're only pregnant for a couple of months too, so they can have babies after babies after babies, right? They have lots and lots of babies. Okay, good. So when we read that there was a rabbit who was about to have a family, we mean that for real. Like when these mama rabbits have babies, they don't have a baby, they have a family. Okay, so there was a rabbit who was about to have a family, and she entreated another rabbit to lend her her hutch. What is a hutch? To lend her her hutch. What is a hutch? A house. And what kind of house should we think of here when it says, can you lend me your house, your hutch? What does that mean? What's a hutch like? A den, a hole. Usually when we think of a rabbit hutch, it's a cage. Very good, George. It's sort of a small cage or a box that's built for rabbits. It's meant to keep the rabbits safe, especially when the mother is having babies and the babies are small. We keep them in a hutch to keep them safe because other animals will kill them. Okay. So let's think of when we say a rabbit hutch, let's think of a small little pen where it's good for, a mother to have some babies and keep them safe. Okay. So a rabbit who was about to have a family entreated another rabbit to lend her her hutch until she was able to move about again, and assured her that she should then have it without fail. So this one rabbit's about to have babies. She doesn't have a place that's safe. She doesn't have a place to have her babies. So she goes to another rabbit and asks if she can stay in her hutch until, notice what it says. Remember, the details are always important in these fables. Until she, the mother, was able to move about again. So she asks if she can borrow this hutch to have her babies, and then when she's back on her feet, she'll move out and give the hutch back to the other mother. And she assured her that she would have her hutch back without fail. The other rabbit readily consented. That means immediately agreed. said, "Oh yeah, sure, no problem," right? The other rabbit very readily consented, and with a great deal of civility. What do you think civility means? With a great deal of civility, resigned it to her immediately. So immediately gave her the hutch. What do you think civility means? Margaret wrote kindness. Henry wrote friendship. Yeah, those are both good answers. Okay, civility. It means being a good neighbor. All right, being a good neighbor. So the other readily consented and with a great deal of civility resigned it to her immediately. Very friendly, very generous, gave up her hutch to this mother who was about to have babies. However, when the time was up, the first rabbit who owned the hutch, she came and paid her a visit and very modestly intimated. That means she just kind of hinted at the promise that was made. She didn't come in and like kick the door open and start screaming at her and stuff like that. Very modestly intimated or suggested that now she was up. Remember, the promise was you could stay, you were going to stay until you were back on your feet. Well, you're back on your feet. Until she was now up, and she hoped that she might have her hutch back, for it was really inconvenient for her to be without a place to stay any longer. And remember, her place. It was very inconvenient for her to be without her own place. She must therefore be so free as to desire to provide herself with other lodgings as long as she could. So the first rabbit comes back and says, "Okay, I'm glad. How are you doing? Everything looks good. Great to see you're doing good. I don't mean to be I don't mean to be a pain, but I really need my hutch back. And you said that you were going to stay here until you were back on your feet, and really it looks like you're doing okay. So, what's going on?" Being very friendly about it. The other rabbit, the one who just had the babies, the other rabbit replied that truly she was ashamed of having kept her so long out of her house. Now, those of you who are in Theophrastus's characters, those of you studying Theophrastus's characters, when you study the fables, think of the characters, right? Because you're going to see those characters in these fables. So let's look at this second rabbit, right? She comes to the first rabbit and asks if she can borrow her hutch and promises that she'll move out as soon as she's back to strength. She hasn't done that. Okay, she didn't keep her promise, and the first rabbit's now coming back to find out what's going on because she's living without a house right now. The other rabbit, the one who had the babies, notice how she talks. She says that she is truly ashamed of having kept her so long out of her house. Okay, so notice how she says, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm ashamed that I've had to stay here so long." Do you think that she's being honest when she says that? Do you think that that's honest? No. Okay, she's not being honest. She's not ashamed. Okay, and we're going to see that by her actions. Remember, we always judge someone's words by what they actually do. We don't allow people to tell us that what they're doing and what they desire or what they mean are different things. We judge a tree by its fruits, right? We judge a person by what they're doing, not by what they say, because we all know how easy it is to lie. Okay, so we judge a person by what they're doing. If she was truly ashamed to be staying there so long, she probably would have done something like contacted the other rabbit sooner and told her what was going on. She wouldn't just stay there and wait until the rabbit comes back to find out what's going on. So we can see that the behavior and what she says don't agree with each other. And that's always a red flag for us that something's wrong. When someone says something, but what they're doing doesn't match up with what they're saying, we know that something's wrong, and we should trust their actions more than their words. All right. So we see that there's something wrong about this rabbit staying in this house. And the way she's talking is not in agreement with the way she's acting. So again, if you're in Theophrastus's characters, you can probably think of some characters that are being illustrated here for us, okay? So she says that she's truly ashamed of having kept her out so long out of her own house, but it was not upon her own account. In other words, it's not her fault. It's not my fault, she says. For indeed, she was well enough to go anywhere. She was well enough. Now remember the promise, the agreement that was made in the beginning, right? It was, can I stay in your place until I'm back on my feet? Well, she's back on her feet. And now she's staying there and she's changing the conditions of the agreement. All right. She says, oh, I'm sorry to be here, but, it's not my fault, actually. I'm well enough to go anywhere, but it's the babies who are yet so weak that she was afraid they would not be able to follow her. The babies, I can't leave because the babies are so weak. Now, the first rabbit is put in a difficult situation because the first rabbit, is friendly and generous and is civil. We learn the word civil. She's very friendly. And what happens now, if you're the rabbit, the generous, the good rabbit, you feel bad for the mother because you do feel bad for the babies. And so it's difficult for a good person. It's difficult for a generous person to now say, no, I'm sorry, you have to get out, because the promise, it's difficult for a good person to strictly keep the terms of an agreement because they're compassionate, right? And so that's a way that someone can take advantage of a good person, to actually take advantage of their kindness, right? Knowing that they're not going to get angry, knowing they're not going to throw them out. They'll actually use that to take advantage of the person. So we've got to be careful about that. That's why agreements are important, okay? But notice how the person who is breaking the agreement will try to flip it over onto the other person as if they're the one who's being mean, okay? So the rabbit was well enough. She's back on her feet, but she says her babies are too weak and they need more time. They're not going to be able to follow her. So if she would be so good as to let her stay a fortnight longer, she would take it for the greatest obligation in the world. Now, that's a difficult sentence to understand if you're younger. She says, if you would be so kind as to let us stay a fortnight longer. Does anybody know what a fortnight is? And I'm not asking for wild guesses. Does anybody know what a fortnight is? Anybody know what a fortnight is? "14 days, very good. It's 14 days, 2 weeks, good. Okay, this is not a phrase we use in America. We don't use fortnight in America. In fact, when I saw it in the fable today, what I thought it meant is not what it meant. I thought it meant about a month. I thought it meant 40 nights. It means 14 nights. So yeah, that's right. 14 days, 2 weeks. Let Joseph Gold. I'm looking at the participants just so you know, and I don't see anybody waiting to get in. So there's nobody waiting to get in. Just so you know. Yeah, so a fortnight, let's get back to the fable here. A fortnight is 2 weeks. So she asks if she can stay 2 weeks longer. Now realize also that means that the rabbit has to stay 2 more weeks out of her house. Okay, so that's quite a bit to ask of somebody. If she would be so good as to let her stay a fortnight longer, she would take it for the greatest obligation in the world. Now, what that means is, I will be indebted to you. I'll owe you a million favors if you'll let me stay 2 more weeks here. So I will be obligated to you. Okay. Yeah, I will be in your debt. Very good, George. All right. So that's what she says. She says, "Oh, I'll be indebted to you if you do this for me. Let me stay 2 more weeks." So what happened? What happens? The second rabbit who owns the house, the second rabbit was so good-natured and compassionate, as to comply with this request too. So she agrees to let her stay 2 more weeks. But at the end of the term, when the 2 weeks was up, she came and told her positively that she must turn out, she must move out of the hutch, for she could not possibly let her stay there a day longer. So she comes and she says, look, we made an agreement. We already fulfilled that agreement. You asked for 2 more weeks, and I let you stay 2 more weeks. And now here you are still in the place. You have to move out now. And notice how the other rabbit responds. She says, must turn out, like she's offended, right? Must turn out, treating her like she's being mean, right? After she's already done her favor upon favor. Doesn't think about the other rabbit not even being able to live in her own house. But she says, must turn out. We'll see about that. For I promise you, unless you can beat me and my whole litter of young, you are never likely to have anything more to do here. So this mother rabbit, she's a real rascal, right? She says, must turn out. Right? Let's see if you can force me and all of my babies here to get out. Then you can have this place. You're never going to get this place back. So she's crazy, right? That's an evil, selfish person. And this poor, kind person who was generous is stuck without a house. And now what is she going to do? Is she going to try to fight the, here's the other problem, right? Good-natured people, she's not going to be interested in getting into some kind of nasty fist fight with this other person. She's a good person, right? Good people don't like to fight. And what often happens in situations like this is the good people choose to just say, you know what, forget, I'm not going to fight about this. I can go find another place. I'm not going to fight with this nasty person. And they just give it up. Okay. So that's what often happens in the world. Now, it's not good that that happens. It's not just that that happens, but sometimes I would even say very often to good people, this is what happens. Okay. Because good people really don't want to spend their time fist fighting with their neighbors, right? They would rather just say, look, you can have this dumb thing. I'm not going to fight about it. I tried to be friendly and you're just being unjust here. Now, what that teaches us, okay, we should be upset. We should be upset. The other rabbits should be upset. The other people in the community should be upset. And the other people should not allow this to take place. They shouldn't allow this to happen. It shouldn't be for the mother rabbit who owned the hutch to fight to get her hutch back. She shouldn't have to do that. And so what we learn here in this fable is, again, we learn lots of moral lessons here, but one lesson we learn here is that this is the purpose of government. This is the purpose of government. Government protects good people. That's what government is for. Government protects good people so they don't have to fight against bad people, right? When someone comes and steals something from you, if someone steals your bike or a car or whatever, anything, you shouldn't have to go chase that person and risk your own safety and fist fight someone to get your stuff back. You shouldn't have to do that. And the purpose of government is for the community to protect the innocent. That's the purpose of government, for the whole community to organize together and set up a system that protects the innocent. So in a case like this, when there's someone doing something wrong and another person trying to be a good neighbor, and then the person who's doing wrong challenges the person to come and get it, right? Come fight if you want it. That other rabbit should not fight that bad person, right? That rabbit should go and call the other rabbits. And again, this sounds ridiculous because I'm talking about rabbits. I'm not crazy. It's a fable. I'm talking about rabbits here. But that person should go and call other people together and tell them what happened. And then the whole community should come and settle the the problem. That's what government is for. That's what the police are for. That's what the courts are for. That's what the laws are for, and so on. So, this idea that if you take my stuff, I'm going to fist fight you for it, that's really not how to live in society. And what could happen is you'll end up in trouble too, because it's illegal to fight. So we've got to be careful that we don't try to return evil for evil, right? Or pay back someone who does something bad to us with bad behavior ourselves. We got to be careful. So that's the purpose of government. The purpose of government is to protect good people when bad people do bad things to them, break promises, don't keep agreements, and so on, okay? So one of the moral lessons, again, there's a bunch, but one of them is that it's important for us to establish governments to protect innocent people in situations like this, okay? This is what government is for. Now, the problem with government is that government can sometimes get corrupt, because that rabbit who stole the hutch, that rabbit can end up becoming a person who works in the government, and then you've got people in the government doing the same thing, right? So there are times where government can be corrupt, and that's why we've got to be careful. In America, and again, I know some of you are from different countries, and I don't want to get into all different kinds of government, but in America, where it's a democracy, we vote for almost every person in our government, even with police. If you live in a rural area like I do, we vote for the sheriff. So the sheriff is an elected position. We choose a person to be in charge of the county police. Mayors are elected, governors are elected of states. Then you've got representatives in Congress who make the laws. You've got a president who enforces the laws. You've got courts who are appointed by the president who's elected. So you can see that the people work together to appoint all of these leaders. And then we trust that those government offices are going to work to protect good people in our society. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes the opposite happens, okay? So George wrote, don't go overboard with unnecessary kindness. Let's talk about this a little bit, okay? And we might only get through this one fable today, so I don't know. But there's a lot of moral instruction that we can draw from this fable. This is a real problem, okay? If you look at the 10 Commandments, you'll know that one of the 10 Commandments is, thou shalt not steal. Right? Thou shalt not steal. That's a very important commandment because it teaches us that God respects private property. All right. So if you go to the store and you buy yourself a new book, the commandment says, thou shalt not steal. And it tells everyone else that they have to respect that that book is your private property, because you worked for it, or you used money that you were given to buy that book legally. That book is yours. No one else has a right to take it. No one else has a right to even borrow it without your permission. It's your private property. The 10 Commandments teach private property when we read, thou shalt not steal. You're not allowed to take other people's stuff, okay? So we have this idea of private property. That hutch belonged to that first rabbit. It was hers. And because it's hers, she has the right to do with it what she chooses. So when that rabbit came to her and said, can I borrow your hutch? She would have been perfectly just, as far as the law is concerned. She would have been perfectly just to say, no, this is my only place to stay. I don't have other houses to go to. This is the only place I can live. I need this house. It was her private property. She could have said no. If someone asks to have something of yours or to borrow something of yours, you have the right to say no. And that doesn't mean that you're being mean or you're being selfish. It's your private property, okay? So you've got to always remember that you have a right to private property, and everyone else around you also has a right to private property. So that's the first important thing. Now, just because you have a right to private property, it doesn't mean that you should say no to everyone if they ask to have something or to borrow something, because there's more to life than just having private property, right? It's also good to have friends. It's also good to have friendships with your neighbors. It's also good to do works of mercy to other people, right? So when you have private property, when something is yours, what's important is that you have the right to decide what to do with it. But that doesn't mean that you should be like Scrooge and just hoard it all to yourself and say, get out of here. You know, it's my private property. That's not necessarily good either. All right. So we're always going to face this difficult decision when we see someone needs something, or someone asks for something, or someone wants to borrow something. If someone just comes and takes it, that's different, because that's stealing, right? But when someone does ask us, sometimes it's really difficult to make a decision, because if we're good people, we want to be generous, but sometimes we actually can't afford to be generous, right? Sometimes we have to be careful. Some people can be too generous, and they can actually get themselves into trouble. And it's difficult. For example, you may pull up to a light on the road and there's a man holding a sign asking for money, right? Asking for money because he says we have no idea who this person is. We have no idea if he's actually hungry, or if he's just, pretending to be hungry to get money by we don't know. So it's a very difficult decision. And there's a couple different ways we can think about it, right? We can just say, you know what, I really don't care what his situation is. I'm going to help him because I know that God sees all things, and God will see me trying to be kind, and God will reward me for it. That's one way to think about it, right? Another way to think about it is to say to the man, look, what you need to do is not hang out here on the highway and ask for money. You need to go visit a church, because we donate to churches and churches help the poor. So go and visit the church, and the church will help you. That's what the church is for, right? So we can direct them to go to a place where we've already provided for them to get help, and then wonder why they wouldn't go there. Now, if you've ever watched A Christmas Carol, this is what Ebenezer Scrooge says when he's asked to donate money. He says, well, aren't there any workhouses? Like, aren't there already places where these people can go to get help that are provided for by taxes and donations and things like that? And the man who's collecting money says, some would rather die than go there. And so you see, these are complicated questions, right? Like, does the person who's poor have a right to decide how he's going to get the stuff that he needs? That's another difficult question, right? If we've already provided ways for people to get help, does it make any sense to go and try to get help in some other way? So you can see there's all kinds of good moral questions in this reading here, all right? But the hutch belonged to the rabbit. It was her private property. She had the right to say no or to lend. If she chooses to lend, she doesn't have to lend. So that first rabbit was already obliged to her and should have been thankful and should have tried to get out of there as soon as possible. If she was good-natured, if she was civil, she should have tried to get out of there as soon as she could, because she would feel bad that that other rabbit was forced to live someplace else. But we see that, that selfishness makes a person crazy, right? Selfishness makes people crazy. I see a bunch of chats in here. Give me a second to look at these, what people are writing here. All right, I'll hold off on chats until I'm done here. I want to get finished. All right, so private property and sharing are some really difficult things, and you'll always wrestle with these things. You don't know if you should share with someone. You don't know if the person really has sincere need. What if the person has needs because of their sins, right? What if a person, let's say that, you're doing your work and studying, and you see this kid who's always bad. He always disobeys his parents, never doing his studies, never practicing and learning good skills. And then you become adults and you move on, and you're going to college or working or whatever you're doing. You're living a responsible life. And now this other person gets into all kinds of trouble because he didn't do his studies, didn't finish his schoolwork, didn't develop any skills, and now he's poor because he's bad, right? Is he owed help? That's a different question, right? So you can see these things are very complicated, and what you should be doing, especially when you're young, during your school years is you should be studying moral philosophy and the catechism and reading the Bible and studying ethics when you get older, because you have to get answers to these questions so you know how to live, because it's very difficult. If you go out into the world, with sort of a dopey, silly mind, and you just say, oh, these people are so friendly, everybody's so nice. There are people in the world who are going to take every dollar you have and leave you with nothing, like this rabbit who takes the hutch. There are people who are more evil than you can imagine. They will literally take everything you have. And you've got to learn to be careful. But at the same time, you can't be like Scrooge and just be selfish and miserable and not help anyone. So learning who to help, when to help, how to help, those are very difficult things that have to be learned. And you need to make sure that while you're young, you're studying to learn how to think in those different situations. It's very difficult. Okay. So anyway, that's the fable of the two rabbits. I think we've got a couple good moral lessons. We talked about the importance of government, right? So that situations like this can be solved. We talked about the danger of being too generous, right? Being generous to selfish people, because it will never end, right? We also saw an example of making an agreement and then having someone break the terms of that agreement, okay? So a number of good moral lessons in this fable, and we could keep going. We could just think of more and more and more, because it's a really great fable. So remember the fable of the two rabbits. And when you're in a situation like that, someone asks you for help, think, what would the fable of the two rabbits teach me to do in this situation? That's how you can apply the fable to your life. All right. Or if you're interested in getting into government when you get older, you have to think, what is the purpose of the government? What should the government be doing? And remember the fable of the two rabbits, to think about what's going on out in the world and what the government is supposed to be doing, supposed to be protecting the innocent. Okay, so you can think of some applications from the fable. Now, the other question that I normally ask is, why did Aesop choose rabbits? Because they're just known for having lots of babies and stuff. So it makes sense to use rabbits to tell a story about mothers and their babies. Okay. So that's that. I saw a bunch of texts come in. Unfortunately, I can't keep track of them as I'm talking. Jude says that he cannot hear me very well. I don't know if that's true for other people or just on Jude's side. Let me just read these real quick. George said, once you saw that she broke the first promise, or he says two promises, I would say the first promise, right? Once she broke the first promise, you should wonder if she's really going to keep the second promise, right? Again, you should judge people by their actions, not by their words. She should have made sure she could get it back before giving it in the first place. That reminds us of another fable. Who can think of another fable? And don't just start, type think. Who can think of another fable where an agreement was made and the people who made the agreement didn't have the power to keep that agreement? Does anybody remember another fable? Does anybody remember another fable where people made an agreement and then someone chose to break the agreement, but they had no way to actually settle it? George said the lion and the goat. George mentioned the one I was thinking of. Remember when it's not just a lion and a goat, though. Remember there were a number of animals who went hunting with a lion, and they agreed that whatever they caught, they would divide between themselves. And then the goat caught a big fat deer, and the lion basically said, okay, thanks, goat. This is mine. You guys get out of here. And there was nothing that they could do about it, right? Because they couldn't fight against the lion. So I was thinking of the one of the lion hunting with the other animals. Very good. All right, good. So that's fable number 98. And again, we could talk about this fable all day. It's a very rich fable with lots of moral lessons, and it's very relevant in your life. I'm sure that you deal with this kind of stuff every day. You know, you get a new Christmas present, or it's your birthday and you get a birthday present. And what happens once you get a new birthday present? All your brothers and sisters swarm around you, right? And they start trying to get that present out of your hands, you know? Hey, look at that new remote control car. Hey, look at that new look at that new toy that so and so got. Hey, buddy, old pal, can I borrow? Can I play with it? Can I get, a lot of times people buy things for Christmas and then they expect to play with them after they give them to somebody else. So we face this kind of stuff all the time, right? It's very difficult to be generous. But at the same time, we have to remember that God promises to bless and reward people who are generous. So even sometimes when we do get taken advantage of and we do lose things, we can be upset about that, but we can't be completely upset because God knows, God saw everything, and he'll make sure that we're rewarded, possibly in this life, possibly in the world to come, okay? So that's all for Psalm 98. If you've got any questions about that fable, hold them until we get done, okay? Because when the chats come in while I'm going through things, I can't really see them, so it's a little messy. So Claire wrote, the moral of this fable is that it's important for us to establish a government to keep us safe. That's one moral. That's one good moral lesson from this fable, okay? And I wouldn't, George said, they waste everything we give them. I don't know who they is. That's the danger of writing with pronouns. We don't know who they is, okay? So anyway, let's get on to the next one. Let's get on to fable number 99, okay? So stop talking about that one until we're done, and we'll study the husbandman and his sons, okay? The husbandman and his sons. This is fable number 99. So pay attention to this one. This is another good fable. This is entertaining, okay? The husbandman and his sons. And just before we get started, does anybody know what a husbandman is? What is a husbandman? It's not a husband. Don't think of like a wife and her husband. That's not what a husbandman is. What is a husbandman? A farmer. Yeah, good. We don't necessarily use this word in America. I don't say I'm a husbandman because I live on a farm, all right? It's a person usually who takes care of a garden, sometimes a farmer. Husbandry is the art of growing things, okay? So a certain husbandman, and we'll see what a husbandman is as we read this fable. A certain husbandman lying at the point of death, so a dying husbandman, called his sons around him and gave into their charge, gave into their control, his fields and vineyards. So that reveals to us what a husbandman is, okay? He's a farmer, he's got vineyards and so on. He gives them to his sons, and he tells his sons that a treasure lay hidden somewhere in the fields, within a foot from the ground. Okay, so it's not very deep, just within a foot. But there's a treasure in the fields. So when his sons hear that, they thought he spoke of money or some kind of, gold or silver or something like that. They thought he spoke of money which he had hidden, and after he was buried, they dug most industriously all over the estate, all over the property. They dug everywhere, but they found nothing. The soil was after being so well loosened, because they dug the soil of the whole property up looking for the money. The soil being so well loosened, the succeeding crops, the next year's crops, were of unequaled richness. It was the greatest harvest ever. And the sons then found out what their father had in view in telling them to dig for hidden treasure. So this is the fable of the husbandman and his son. So the father tricked his sons, right? The father tricked his sons. He said, oh, I just want you to know, out in the fields, I buried a treasure, and then he died. And so the sons are like, oh man, there's a treasure out in the field. Let's go dig it up. And they start digging and digging. They can't find it. So they end up digging the whole entire property, and they find nothing. And you can imagine they're probably pretty angry or confused at that point. Maybe they thought their father tricked them. But then time goes by, and the the crops get planted as usual. Usually the family doesn't actually do that. They probably had people working on the land who did all the planting for them. And the next year's crops were richer than ever before. And they realized what their father meant when he told them to dig for hidden treasure. Okay, so now the moral of this fable, the story is pretty easy to follow, but the moral of this fable is, I think, a little challenging. All right. Now, I don't know if any of you live on farms or have ever done farm work, but farm work is not fun. And usually kids who grow up on farms get tired of farm work and they don't like to do it. Their parents usually like it, but the kids usually don't like it, especially work like this, like digging and hoeing and planting and all that kind of stuff. It's hard work. And you have to do it usually at a time of the year when the weather's bad, and it's very, very difficult. That's why the Bible says those who sow in tears, they plant their fields in tears, because it's very difficult work. You usually have to do work when the weather's bad. You have to plow when it's cold and all that kind of stuff. So the work of the farm is very difficult, and usually kids don't like it, and the parents sort of force them to do it, and the kids always are trying to get out of it, or they stop working when dad's not watching. It's very hard to get kids to do farm work because it's very difficult, and it's also a kind of work that kids can't appreciate. Because think about it, you do farm work, let's say you plow the field like in January, then you plant the field in March or April or May, and then you have to wait until August or September for the harvest. So you have to work very, very hard with no reward. And you usually work during the poorest time of the year. You know, what's also the worst about planting is it's usually during Lent if you're a Catholic. So not only are you working hard, but you've got Lent telling you that you shouldn't eat very much, and you're trying to discipline yourself for Lent, and yet you've got more work to do than any other time of the year. So it's a very difficult time for farm families, especially Catholic farm families. And kids don't like to do that work. Usually when kids work, they want gratification quickly. So it's like, hey, clean up your room and I'll give you $5, right? So they want to get paid immediately every time they work. If you cut the grass, I'll give you $20. If you do this, we'll get pizza tonight. Or there's always like a quick reward, and that's how kids like to work. Kids like to work and get rewarded quickly. They like to work and get paid at the end of the job. People who work, for a paycheck, they like to work and get paid on Friday. They don't want to be told, if you work from January until August, I'll pay you in September. Very few people are willing to work like that. All right. But that's how farming works. In the planting season, you might hardly have any food left over from the previous year. And then slowly the gardens start back up again and food starts to come in. But sometimes those months are very difficult when all the food starts getting used up. So it's difficult to get people to do farm work. And you can see these sons probably didn't want to do it. And the father had to think, I'm about to die. My sons don't appreciate the farm. They don't understand the value of farm work. How can I get my sons to appreciate the value of farm work? And so the father tells them a lie, right? The father lies to his children. He says, you know what? I just want to tell you that out in the fields, there is a treasure buried out there. All right. This is how the father chooses to help his sons. He tells them something that, well, it's kind of true, but also not true, right? He knows what his sons will think. He knows what they will think. And he tells them something that, based on what they're going to think, is false. And so he dies and they run out into the field. They dig they do the work like they never have done before. They work more than he could ever have imagined that they would ever work, because they're looking for this treasure. And they find there's no money anywhere on the farm. And then all of a sudden they see this great harvest. And what would that harvest would have brought them a great treasure of money, right? Because they could have either kept it for their own use or sold it and made money. They would have had a great harvest. They would have collected a treasure, just like the father said. but the way was not what they had thought. Okay, so we have one good question here to ask about this fable. Is it okay to lie for the sake of some good purpose? Okay, because that's what this father does here. It is a lie. The father is lying to his children because he knows what they will think when he tells them that there's a treasure in the field. He doesn't just tell them the simple truth. He doesn't say, look, boys, if you work the fields and work as hard as you can and turn over every part of the field, you'll have an amazing harvest. And in September, you'll have a treasure. He doesn't say that. He tells them something else, knowing what they'll think, and he uses their thoughts to get them to do something by telling them what really is a lie for them. Okay, so we have this good moral question of, is it okay to mislead someone for their good? That's a very difficult question. All right, is it okay to mislead someone for their good? Now, we do this pretty often, unfortunately. For example, if let's say we love mom and we want to plan a surprise birthday party. So we start inviting people to come to the house for mom's birthday party, or someone organizes a party, and we don't want mom to know about it. So what do? We lie to mom, right? And we're lying to her because we're excited to think about how happy she'll be when she's surprised by the birthday party. So we love mom and we're excited to make her happy. But in order to make her happy, we've got to trick her, right? We've got to find a way to trick her so she doesn't know what's going on. So we hide the plans from her, and we lie to her, but we're trying to do something good for her, and the lie is for her. So it's a very difficult question, a difficult moral question, whether it's ever good to lie. Now, you can just say, yeah, of course it's good to lie. It's good in that situation because we desire the person's good, and that's all that really matters. But it's not all that really matters. It is more complicated than that, because what if your mother doesn't understand that you're planning a birthday party and she gets angry at you, or she makes a decision based on what you said, and then that decision ends up causing problems because she thought you meant this, but you were actually planning to surprise. So you can see that even a lie that's intended for good could actually bring something bad. It could actually bring harm to someone. So it's more complicated than just saying, hey, if you want something good, it's okay to lie to bring about good for some other. It's more complicated than that, because you can't control that other person's decisions or other things that might happen. So it's more complicated than that. All right. So we have this moral question in this fable. Is it okay to lie to someone to bring about a good desired end? It's a complicated question. So that's the first thing. If we think about this from the perspective of the father, though, right? If we think about this from the perspective of the father taught his sons an important life lesson, and he may have had no other way to teach them that lesson. And so we can say this is a fable that teaches us the importance of being cunning, right? Of being shrewd in how we deal with other people. Sometimes we have to bring about a desired end that other people will oppose, and we've got to find a way to overcome their foolishness and lead them to the good result. We've got to be shrewd. We've got to be cunning. We can't just be simple and just let things happen as they have. Sometimes we have to think about whether there's a way to bring about some end that's good, even if it has to mislead people for a time. There may be a time to do that. All right. I could talk more and more about that, but we're out of time here today. But I'm going to leave you with that. The moral lesson that I would suggest for this fable, and you're free to think of other ones, of course, you just have to give a reason, right? If you think of another moral lesson, you just have to be willing to give a reason for it. But I would say that this fable teaches us the importance of being cunning and clever in leading other people, okay? being clever in managing other people, leading them to a good end in spite of their lack of virtue or their sins or their vices and problems that they have. It's possible for a leader to lead people to a good end, even if they don't appreciate it. Okay, so I think it can be considered a fable that teaches us about leadership. All right. But again, we can think of many fables in this situation, and you've got this silly picture of these sons, and it's assumed that they're kind of like dopey sons, who the father has to trick into doing something good. So that's the fable of the husbandman and his sons. All right. So that's all for the content that I wanted to share today. We looked at fable number 98, the fable of the two rabbits. And we looked at fable number 99, which is the fable of the husbandman and his sons. Remember, I'm just sharing, my own thoughts and views on the. There's a ton of more that you can meditate on, think about. You can think about the fables from different characters' points of view, and so on. So don't think that the lesson is, Mr. Michael said this, therefore go copy and paste that, and that's the right answer. It's more complicated than that. You may have your own thoughts, your own experiences that give you some insights into these fables, and that's how you should be thinking about them. My ideas maybe should help you to start thinking about them, but I'm not asking you just to write whatever I say. So that's all that I wanted to share today. If you've got to leave, you're free to go at this point. Thank you for coming. If you've got questions or want to chat a bit, I'll hang out as long as the questions or chat keeps coming in. So if you're going to head out of here, thanks for coming. I'll see you next time. And for those of you who want to chat, I'll stay here as long as you want. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, though, and I'm going to check out the chat box down here. All right, let's see what's going on down here. Lawrence asked a question before. He said, what if you know where some treasure is and some criminal is trying to make you tell them where it is? Well, if it's your treasure, we just talked about with the fable of the two rabbits, right? If it's your treasure, you have the right to keep it to yourself. But at the same time, if it's going to cost you your life, that might be a bad decision, right? If someone, if you're walking through the parking lot and someone comes up to you and threatens to beat you up or, pulls a knife out and you've got a wallet with money in your pocket, I don't know how smart it is to risk your life to try to save the, $50 you've got in your pocket, unless you think your life is worth $50, right? It's probably better not to do that. But again, you can see that those are difficult questions, right? Those are difficult questions. And my advice to you would be, rather than try to think of how to solve the problem, what you should be doing, if you're wise, is trying to think about how to avoid that problem in the first place, right? Like, not walk around with $500 in your wallet, right? That's the way to avoid that problem. Like, if someone came to rob me, they'd be very disappointed because I don't have any money. So, I'm already safe. If they broke into my car, there's nothing in there. So, I'm kind of robbery free. You can avoid these problems. Jesus teaches us to avoid them. He says, do not store up treasure in heaven where you know that thieves break in and steal things. So you already know that people are going to steal. That's why you shouldn't store up riches, right? So a wise man sees evil coming and avoids it beforehand. A dum-dum gets himself into the bad situations and then pretends he's got to find a way out. That's not the wise way to handle it. All right? So I don't know that I would be willing to risk my life to save a treasure, but the first question is, why would you keep a treasure? That's kind of dumb, right? To keep a buried treasure is asking for trouble, because eventually someone will find out. Like, if you have a box in your room and you keep $1,000 in that box, eventually somebody is going to find out that you've got a ton of money saved in your room and you're asking for trouble. Okay? So that's that. What's the moral of the two rabbits for this lesson? Well, we talked about how government, right? The need for government. We talked about how it's really not possible for innocent people to always protect themselves. It's needed for the community to work together to protect the innocent. So we see there a situation where we would need, as a community, we would need to step in and help. Lawrence asks, can you lie so they go the wrong way and you can tell the police where they are? Again, this idea that we're going to trick criminals sometimes is not a very good idea. And the smart thing to do would be to avoid the problem in the first place, right? Let's look through here. Anna wrote, this is, if it was a crop that seems like treasure because they said they had no food. Yeah, maybe, right? The bottom line is the father knew it would be good for them. He knew that if he told them, you know, now that I'm dying, just go take care of it. He knew that they wouldn't listen. They wouldn't take care of the field. They wouldn't do that work. So he had to think of a way to get them to do it. Maybe, we don't know if this is true, but maybe after that first experience, they would say, oh, now we understand why dad wanted us to farm, because we can have a great treasure from our harvest. Maybe they just didn't understand that really as kids, and now they would appreciate it. So maybe it worked out. Don't know. Okay. Yeah. Margaret says, just put the treasure in the bank. That's what the bank is for. The bank is a way that the community works together to keep things safe, right? And banks help us to do that. Okay. Pretty good thoughts there. Anything else for this fable or for another fable or for any of your other studies? Remember, I asked to do me a favor and fill out those surveys if you haven't done that yet. classicalliberalarts.com/surveys. They're not for me. Those are for the organization that's accrediting the Classical Liberal Arts Academy, which will be good for you in the long run. Okay. Any other questions about this fable or another fable or any of the stuff we talked about? We talked about some good topics there today. Any thoughts or questions about any of that stuff? So Anna, was Joseph able to get into the meeting or not? Okay, so Joseph is with Anna. Just so you guys know, I usually open up the meeting room like 15 minutes early. So if you're not comfortable using all this stuff, just try to come early. Then it gives you some time to figure things out, okay? Just come a little early. Okay, yeah, I'll be on here usually like 15 minutes before the class starts so we can use that time to get problems figured out. Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure why it would say to wait for me to open it when it was already open. Not sure. Make sure also you're clicking the right link, right? If you're clicking a link to a different class or something like that, it takes you to a different room, so it wouldn't be the same room. That probably is what happened for you. Or if you went to my normal meeting room, like my tutoring meeting room, that's not the same as this. So make sure you use the right link for the meeting. That's what I bet happened. Just make sure it's the Aesop's Fables email, right? All right, so today's Tuesday. No, yeah, what day is it today? Tuesday, yeah. Tomorrow's Wednesday, so tomorrow we'll do Latin studies. Thursday, we do Greek studies if you want to come to that. And then Friday, we don't have any class scheduled, but if you'd like to have a live meeting, talk to your parents and we'll see what we can do on Fridays. I'm willing to do it. All right, I don't see any more questions coming in, so I think I'm going to wrap up. Last call for questions before we close this up and get back to work. Last call for questions. Anything else? Doesn't look like it. If there's anything else you want to talk about, feel free to email me. Just write an email to mail@classicalliberalarts.com. And I'll see you guys either tomorrow or next week for our meeting. All right. Thank you for coming. God bless you guys.